Let's go to, I see another hand, but I'll start with Chairman Keith Yamamoto, or co-chairman. Thank you for chairman's prerogative. So you get the first question, then we'll go to Giovanni, and then I saw Bob Cook-Deegan, and then Jianying. So please.
Great session.
Would you mind turning your microphone on? Yeah, thank you. Just so people online can hear.
Is it on?
Not yet, sir. There it is.
There we go. A terrific session, and I've got all sorts of questions, but I'll just ask one of Madeline. You talked about how you have enlarged the conversation to include experts who aren't licensed experts, and I think that's a good way to put it. And I wonder if you could just be more specific about those conversations and ways, and maybe a specific example of a situation where those conversations with non-licensed experts actually changed the pathway that you're pursuing.
It's a great question. I think so a lot of the engagements that we've had have been specifically in the research, sort of early research space, and we're now moving into what would that look like for different types of products. But I think participation, like AI, is also a problem of scale. And if you're, building particular products that are meant to be for many different communities, how do you pick which communities to engage with? And so it can be harder on the sort of large product side as opposed to smaller research engagements, which are kind of earlier prototypes. I want to follow up with you. So I'm not directly involved in many of those conversations. They happen across Google in different pockets. So I actually want to follow up with you afterwards, and also happy to share with the larger group any examples that we can share. I think it ends up, again, being driven by sort of individuals in often the sort of UX or research community who are thinking about who are the people who are going to actually be using their products, and then picking a site. But again, how do you sort of scale that is something we're continuing to think about.
Giovanni, over to you. Your question, please. And thanks to the panelists for being as concise as possible. Yeah. Yes,
there it is.
Thank you.
So I'm Giovanni Piedimonte. I'm the vice president of Tulane. Every conversation has to have a devil's advocate, I think. And so let me play like this. I think one of the main reasons why I'm the devil's advocate is, in addition to be a scientist funded by NIH, I'm also a practicing physician. So I have a slightly different way of looking at things. Because when you see patients coming to your clinic and they don't have money to buy insulin, when you see patients coming to your clinic with horrendous lesions or psoriasis, and you realize that the copayment is at least $1,000 if you have a good insurance. When you have patients that are dying of cancer and there is no way that they can afford the CAR T, because CAR T costs $450,000 a cycle. Who wants this golden goose? I mean, frankly, my favorite speaker today was, because I think it reflects reality, how can you think that the future is bright when Bob Califf reminded us that the United States is 34. So it comes after Ghana and several other African countries. We're going to definitely go into the 60s. Let me give you one little tidbit of my experience that explains where we are in the United States. I worked for 7 years at the Cleveland Clinic, the #1 or 2 hospitals in the world. One day I got a call from the governor of Ohio and said, listen, they give me data that cannot be right about the area right around you, which is downtown Cleveland. They say that infant mortality is worse than Africa. So I looked into it.
It's true.
And guess what?
Yeah.
The infant mortality around the best hospital in the world is 18.2 per thousand. Infant mortality, for those of you that are not in the field, is the number of babies that are born alive and die before they turn 1.
Similar story at Johns Hopkins, by the way, because
Similar story.
So
I
anyway,
found that
yes.
I can
Right.
tell you I measured also around the Cincinnati Children, the #1 hospital in the country, children's hospital in the country. Who wants this golden goose?
Right.
If this is the golden goose, I will kill it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, that's the problem, not the proposed solution,
know-
right? I'll categorize that.
Well,
I
it's
hear
just
you.
it's just
I
that
think
in
you're
a
right.
country where
Yeah.
it's even worse. It would be better that we didn't have this technology, but if we have this technology, and it's only for people that can afford it, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse, because go to Berkeley, Bob Reich is going to tell you about what's going on in our economy.
Right.
Before we had,
Can I take this question, the answer to this question?
Yeah, please, just
Or
go
I think, I'll make it really fast because I know we're running out of time. Listen, I'm a clinician. I still practice. I used to be head of the Office of Minority Health and was in charge of the national issue around infant mortality between Black and white communities for a long time. And if we see what's happening right now with sickle cell, and we're advancing sickle cell, may change what's happening, particularly for Black boys and girls, not just in the US, from around the world. You see where the challenges is not in the development of innovation, it's in the adequate deployment of innovation and the way in which we spend on social services to match that deployment. So I don't think of these as either or discussions, they're complementary. We need innovation, but we need innovation that gets to communities at scale. And that steps out of some of the realms of this discussion and talks about coverage and access and social determinants of health and those other things. But we shouldn't kill one goose to try to feed another. We should try to have both flourish at the same time.
All right, let's go to Bob real quick because we're running out of time. Go ahead.
So I have a burning question, actually. So on Thursday, we had a meeting of the Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications Committee for the Earth Biogenome Project, which is trying to come up with a no-patent policy that's modeled on the Structural Genomics Consortium. And what came up was one of our representatives is from South Africa. And what we're trying to do is create a database of reference sequences from all eukaryotes. The South African representative basically said, we're spending all the money to collect these samples, to preserve the national parks in which these critters live, and you want us to make that freely available to your data set. And what came up, we didn't know that the AlphaFold 3 paper was coming out that day. We hadn't read it because it was 6 in the morning. But the South African representative said, why would we give you our critters and make our data completely freely available when it's going to go to AlphaFold and be turned into a subscription model framework that only rich companies can use? So help me out here. What do we tell those people in South Africa what they're going to get out of this?
And we have a response. I just wanted to, Keith.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, please. Why don't we start, Linda, with you, and then Keith Welu also wanted to chime in. So.
Oh, I just wanted
not
to.
my phone, though.
No, I can't get your phone. I just wanted to comment on the exchange around Cleveland Clinic, and if you don't mind, because one of the conclusions of the committee was that the commitment to embedding equity in an innovation system would never solve the problem that
Giovanni.
where'd he go? Giovanni identified. And so what I want to make clear is that Giovanni is raising a really crucial and important question. No matter how expansively we deploy sickle cell CRISPR technology, it won't solve the problem. Sickle cell is I'll be cynical for a moment. It's a nice sort of convenient symbolic expression of what this could do with regard to one specific disease category, which in itself has extraordinary problems of equitable deployment. It will never solve the problem of infant mortality around the Cleveland Clinic. But the committee really had to grapple with the question that we weren't tasked with that, but I do take very seriously this question of, if we pivot our resources towards this without addressing the more fundamental issues, then what problem are we solving? So I just wanted to maybe put that on the stage.
I just want to be clear, though. What I was saying was that it's not either or. As I was saying, that's one example of one challenge in there, but addressing the social determinants of health and the broader aspects is what we need to be focused on as well.
Yeah. Linda, you wanted to chime, I'll let you have the last word because we're at 1 o'clock and we must
Yeah.
report back.
I would like to just comment to the question about South Africa. So during the pandemic, I actually led the COVID pandemic response for the Gates Foundation. And I spent probably 2 years in close contact with the investigators in South Africa, including funding and supporting all of the investigators that identified both Beta and Omicron. And the greatest tragedy that I think, I was honestly disgusted by mankind for a period of time, was when those investigators released the sequences for Beta and Omicron, and the only thing they received in return was to have their borders closed and their countries shut down and access to, the outside world prevented. Despite their generosity to the globe for sharing that information. And then, of course, those variant vaccines were made, which they didn't access and they couldn't access, and there was no global supply. So for me, this idea that we must really have a truly inclusive response and a truly inclusive perspective on how the data is used, how it is shared, and who benefits from it is absolutely critical in bringing forward this discussion at a global level. And I couldn't agree more with the idea of people riling at sharing their data and then having, not being able to access the benefits of it. So I feel very strongly that, this is part of the agenda that this committee and this meeting should address, is how do we really keep a globally inclusive tool set and make them available to everybody. So brilliant question. I don't know the answer to it, but vitally important to address.
Thank you, Linda. Jen Yang, she has the last question. I was given good news. We have a little bit of overtime, but a little bit is the
All right, I have 2 thoughts and I'll be fast. First is coming back to the data, the issue of collecting data and all these public data and et cetera. I just want to point out it's not just data, it's also benchmarks. You need to measure the right things. So related to this AlphaFold 3 publication, everyone noticed they particularly point to results using Postbuster. Postbuster is a more recently developed method, basically pointing to ways of measuring data that makes it more relevant for drug development, measuring the models, et cetera, results. So in that way, it's aligned with what the industry needs, meaning they need to create molecules that actually work as therapies. Now, we as a community can take that as a cue to, can we come up with benchmarks so that we can measure alignments for societal interests? And so along with the public data come, public benchmarks that would point to the right kind of alignment. Right?
Okay.
So that's one thought. The second is Melanie's comment on the worry about devoting all the resource on AI and not funding the slower work. I really completely wholeheartedly agree with that, even though I'm an AI researcher myself. So one example I want to point out is in our work with Morehouse on the trial diversity, which is a question that was raised earlier as well. It turned out the most effective and important thing to do to increase trial diversity is community outreach to, the underrepresented groups. And, the professor we worked with, Julia Leo, did a fantastic job of having, an army of ground, workers connecting with the community to get people signed up for these trials. And another area of, investments where it's not adequate, and I think this taps into Linda's point as well. Besides the infectious disease, another area is what I brought up as, the better ways and more efficient ways of manufacturing biologics. So I was on a panel for judging innovation prize that was given by Tata Corporation in India.
In India, right.
And I was very proud. The top proposal that we decided to fund as judges is one on using AI methods to enhance the manufacturing pipeline for biologics. And India recognized that as one way for making their country more competitive, but also making these drugs more available to their population. And as was pointed out earlier, that's not an issue just for developing countries. U.S. has the same issue. And so we really need to point our resources towards those directions.
And thanks for mentioning the manufacturing, because I do think that's a really big deal. That could
Yeah.
unlock a lot of things,
Yeah.
especially
And there's
in
very
the
little
smaller
investment in
population
that in
disease
this
type
country.
areas. So any thoughts from the closing thoughts from panelists? Madeline, why don't we start with you? Or to answer that?
I'm sure we're short on.
Okay, you're fine. Okay, Hannah, any final answering that, those comments, or any final thoughts?
The future is bright. We just have to all be at the table.
Right. Garth, and then Linda will have the last word.
I'll echo that. Inclusion as part of the strategy is one of the components to helping us getting there.
Great, thanks. Linda.
I love my panel members. Inclusion would also be my main thing to think about as we move forward.
Okay.
I think it will drive innovation faster as well.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion. Let's thank the panelists. Great job. Okay, and then we will reconvene downstairs in the main room. Thanks to everyone joining us online. So sorry we couldn't see you in person, but thanks for your time nonetheless. So you all have a good day.